Welcome to the On List. So, in this episode, I'm going to try as best I can to talk about the House of Creed in a reasonable amount of time. There's a lot to unpack here, so I may have to skip over some of the more superfluous information. But I'm doing this video in light of Creed's recent sale to Kering. Those of you who may not know what Kering is effectively the luxury conglomerate that formed from the transformation of Gucci PPR, formerly the Gucci Group. Gucci PPR was Gucci Group merged with PPR, and then they just redubbed themselves Kering Group after another merger. So they've become sort of the Pepsi to LVMH's Coke. So LVMH has Dior, one of the best-selling designers on the planet. They also have Maison Francis Kurkdjian, one of the best-selling niche brands on the planet. And then they also have Editions de Parfums Frederic Malle. And Frederic Malle's family used to work for Dior, so it's just all kind of Nepo baby stuff going on there. But that makes them powerhouses, you know. And I think Bernard Arnault's now the richest man in the world. I think he beat Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk recently. So don't know how long he's going to hold on to that because those guys are always back and forth. But that's where it stands as of this video. Now, Kering is no slouch either. Being Pepsi is not a bad thing, right? Pepsi still sold lots of places. Kering owns Balenciaga, which they license out to Coty for the fragrances. They own Saint Laurent, which still keeps their perfume brand as Yves Saint Laurent, and that's also licensed out to L'Oreal to produce. And then, of course, Gucci, because Gucci Group and, you know, Kering, yada, da, da. And that is also licensed out to Coty. So, but that's the problem. Kering doesn't do any of their own stuff in-house like LVMH does. LVMH makes all of their own fragrances. They have all their own laboratories, all their own suppliers, all their own perfumers. They don't have to go to Firmenich or Givaudan or IFF or any of those guys. They do it all themselves in-house. And Kering wants to do that. But they can't do that unless they either spend tons of money to build that infrastructure for like absolutely nothing, you know, or they buy someone who already has the infrastructure. So guess what? Creed, who was family owned and operated and slowly grew in scale, they built their own factories, hired their own bottlers, sourced their own ingredients for the most part, and have kind of been independent for a long time and have just grown organically through the sales of their products. So they have their own distribution network and they have their own manufacturing and their own bottling. So Kering goes, okay, well, you know what? You might have MFK and you might have Frederic Malle, and then Estee Lauder, who's basically like RC Cola. Estee Lauder has Tom Ford, and they have Le Labo. Guess what? We're just going to buy the biggest niche brand, luxury brand on the planet. And now we're going to have, you know, the big boys. So they dumped $2 billion cash. $2 billion cash to buy Creed from Blackrock. Now, Blackrock is an investment group that basically owns like 75% of planet Earth. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't try to establish a new world order, like in the Ministry song, and overthrow all the world governments, and then we live in an even bigger dystopia than we do now. But conspiracy theories aside, they bought Creed 3 years ago from Olivier Creed and Erwin Creed, who then walked away into the sunset billionaires. They got paid $1 billion for their family business, and they walked away. So now here comes Kering looking to have their own, you know, infrastructure for making their own perfumes in-house. So they spent $2 billion. So BlackRock made double their money basically back selling Creed to Kering. Now, what does that mean for the Creed brand? Well, not a whole lot right now, because Creed had already been going more and more down that designer-like path since the success of Aventus. Aventus really changed the game for the brand. But before I can talk about that, I need to rewind the clock back to when the brand started and give you a quick crash course on how Creed got to where they are. So, those of you who don't know, Creed liked to claim that they are like the world's oldest family-owned perfumery, that they've been around for several centuries. Father to son, 7 generations, da 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 da. And that they made perfumes for this queen and that king and this dignitary and that historical figure and blah, 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 blah. But you know, that stuff only worked when we didn't have internet. You know, so in the 70s when they first opened their doors, and in the 80s, people couldn't fact check them. They couldn't Google Creed, so they got away with it. But then once their profile got larger, and a lot of the dead celebrities who still had living family saw their claims and said, hey, our grandpa never had a fragrance from you. That's a lie. You should stop that or we're going to sue you. They had to slowly retreat from all of that claptrap because it wasn't true. You know, they didn't have perfumery labs back in the 1700s. They didn't make fragrances for King Charles III or whoever else. What they did do, though, they did have 7 generations of luxury good making under their belt, because Creed, like a lot of old luxury families, Morbito, Hermes, Louis Vuitton, okay, they did make leather goods, and they did make haberdashery, and they did make sartorial wear starting in the 19th century. So in the 18th century, they were basically leather goods, family-operated leather goods, and they did make gloves and stuff for kings and queens. That stuff's documented, okay? Not perfumes, though. Then into the 19th century, they switched gears and began making dresses and sport coats and things like that. And then eventually, once dandy fashion kicked in, then full-piece suits happened, tailoring effectively. And the last Creed family member to do that was a guy named Charles Henry Creed, and he didn't have any heirs. Rumors circulate that he was gay, which is why he didn't have children. Can't be confirmed, though. And his brother was basically a womanizer and a spendthrift, so he didn't want to give him the family business because he would just run into the ground. So Creed, being both an English family and a French family, the English side looked to the French side and said, hey, does any one of you want to pick up this ball? So that's where Olivier Creed comes in, him being like the nephew of Charles Henry Creed. So he was trained up to be a tailor, and I guess when he got the keys handed to him, he decided, nah, you know what? I just want to be a rich playboy. I want to run off, go on extravagant vacations. I want to race horses. I want to climb mountains. I want to be your typical rich, detached douchebag, right? That's what I want to be. But then eventually, he also decided, I also want to be known for something. I've got an ego, so I got to stroke that ego. I want to be known for something. And since he's in France, and he's French, perfume. Nobody saw that coming. Nobody. So he decided to open up a perfume boutique. Except he wasn't going to school to become a perfumer. No, why would he do that? Rich people don't learn trades. Rich people pay other people to do their stuff for them. You know, they basically do what online gamers with big, deep pockets do. They whale through a game. They just throw money at the game until they win. Pay to play, right? Pay to win. That's it. He did a pay to win strategy on the whole perfume thing. So he went around to different laboratories and said, hey, I want to buy some fragrances. Do you guys have some formulas lying around that you don't want, that you don't need? I don't care what it is, because I'm rich and I'm detached. I just want to put my name on a bottle and say that I made it, right? That's what I want to do. And that somehow worked. You wouldn't think that would work, but it worked. And that's why a lot of the Creed fragrances from the 70s and 80s, they all smell like things that existed in the designer world already, because a lot of those formulas were rejected formulas, things that designers had contracted out, and they typically make 4 or 5 different things, and then they pick one, and then the other 4 get thrown away. But they're not immediately thrown away. They sit sometimes, and they get, okay, someone else might come along and buy this formula. We can make our money back on this, double our money back. And this somebody happened to be Olivier Creed. Now, he met Pierre Bourdon, and I guess he must have saw in big shining lights this guy was a sucker. And this is no offense to Pierre Bourdon. I love his work, but he wasn't very confident about his work. And apparently he could be sold on his formulas by giving him like tailor-made suits. So Olivier Creed did actually use his tailoring skills a little bit, because he made suits for Pierre Bourdon and basically paid him in clothes. So there's a whole book about that you can read. Gabe Oppenheim is the author. Go look it up. It's a cool book. But that's where we get Green Irish Tweed and Bois de Portugal and a lot of the big, more successful Creed fragrances of the late 80s, mid 90s, all the way up through Milsim Imperial, Silver Mountain Water, Royal Water, Himalaya, all that stuff, okay? Once you get into the 2000s and you start getting into stuff like Original Santal and Original Vetiver, that's when Pierre Bourdon began to eventually unplug, because he was getting older by then and he wanted to retire. So he started saying no, but he had students, and those students, Julien Rasquinet, Jean-Christophe Hérault, they got, you know, poached for their formulas by Olivier Creed. And, well, one of those became Aventus, right, in 2010. And Aventus was the big game over moment for Creed ever having any real serious claim to being a niche brand. Because Creed Aventus, which was probably one of the earliest fragrances that was actually custom made for Creed. Like I said, they went around buying formulas that were already sitting around. But by the time Aventus came out, the business had evolved, so now perfumers were actually working for Creed. Like anyone, right? Like a normal designer brand. Perfumers were working for them. So Jean-Christophe Hérault created Aventus. He just wasn't going to get credit for it. You know, because the fiction is that Olivier Creed made it and his son Erwin Creed made it, because they're perfumers, right? Yeah, we're perfumers. Even though all we do is race cars and ride horses, we still somehow have time to make perfumes, right? Because that's how that works. That's reality, right? I'm rich. I don't care. You're going to believe my lies anyway. So Aventus comes out, and suddenly they have an unexpected mainstream hit on their hands. Aventus was originally released to celebrate the brand opening their first American boutique in New York. So it was not meant to be like this massive watershed fragrance. It was just something that they were probably going to release in limited batches, like a lot of things they put out, and then retire it, you know, because there have been a lot of limited one-off Creed fragrances for different reasons that just were here and then gone. But it sold so well that they kept making it, and it just kept selling well. And even though Creed had a habit of raising prices anyway on a regular basis, because since they were always marketed as a step above your common designers, they were always easily 1.5 the price of Chanel or Dior. But that price gap began to grow into the 2000s. So by the time you hit Creed Aventus, the bottles were retailing for about $225, $250. Just still a lot of money. That's more than twice and a half what designers were selling for. Most designers back in 2010 were floating around $85, $90. So they're wanting $250. So that's almost 3 times the price of a designer fragrance by that time. And then because Aventus did so well, they started practicing 15 to 20% markups every year to every other year. It would float. Some years it'd be a 15% markup. Then they might skip a year, and then it might be another 15 or 20% the following year. They might be generous and make only a 12% markup the year after that, but still, that meant a precipitous climb in price. So by the time we get to 2023, a bottle of Creed Aventus now is like $500. And you actually get less in the bottle because they discontinued these big 4-ounce ones, which these used to be their standard bottle. And they only make the 3.4 ounce or the 100 ml bottles. And this cost less for more fluid than it does now. You bought this now? Because this was like $200, but if you bought this now, it'd be like $475 for 30 mils less juice or 25 mils less juice. So yeah, a quarter less in the bottle for almost double the price. That's ridiculous. That's insane. That's more than Frederic Malle. I mean, the only brands that charge more than that are like the super duper ridiculous, like Raja Dove and Spirit of Dubai and Royal Crown. The kind of brands that you only buy just to prove how rich you are. You're not really even concerned about the perfume in the bottle. You just want to flex, you know. I call those flex brands. Raja, Xerjoff, they're all flex brands. More so Raja. I mean, Xerjoff does have some lower price stuff. I mean, several $100s is still not cheap, but you know, it's better than $800, right? It's better than $1,000. There are literally Spirit of Dubai perfumes that cost you like $15,000. And they come in these gigantic bottles like this. It's ridiculous. But again, if you're like, you know, part of the royal family over in Saudi Arabia and you just kind of take a shit and out pops a Ferrari, then you don't care. Money means nothing to you at that point. So that's what those brands are for. So outside of those brands, Creed is still pretty ridiculous nowadays, price-wise. And it only makes sense that, you know, Blackrock would swoop in, let, you know, Olivier and his son Erwin, who were never perfumers, finally walk away from the family business that they had pretended to run for the last 40 years. And then they can go back to being playboys. I'm guessing Olivier is going to retire and live out the rest of his life climbing mountains and racing horses, which he's been doing this whole time anyway, right? And his son is like a race car driver now. So, although I did hear, which is kind of funny, that Erwin wants to get back into fashion. He wants to reignite the tailoring side of the business. That would be the most hilarious thing I've ever seen, if Creed actually reopens its doors as a fashion house, with Erwin Creed as the creative director, making suits and stuff and going right back to 1960, where Charles Henry left off, skipping a generation in the meantime. And then, of course, you know, Kering, which is an owner of designers already, right? Kering already owns Balenciaga, like I said, and Saint Laurent. They already own Gucci. So if Creed decided to become a full-fledged designer, and Erwin Creed was designing clothes, they've already got Kering right there. So it's like, it's almost perfect, right? So yeah, we're going to have our overpriced clothes with our overpriced fragrances, and we're basically going to be like Louis Vuitton on steroids, right? Effectively. So it's perfect, man. World domination right there for you. So that's my Creed video. Now, the whole thing about batch variations and stuff. So when Olivier Creed would buy the formulas, he would take it to the oil houses before he had his own, you know, his own infrastructure. He'd take it to the oil houses and say, hey, I've got this formula. I want to make X bottles of this, but I want you to swap out whatever the materials this calls for more expensive versions. If there's a natural equivalent, I'll take the natural in place of the synthetic. If there's a higher quality synthetic, I'll take that, with no regard to what changes that might do to the actual scent profile of the fragrance, because the whole point was to have noble materials and all that stuff, right? So spare no expense, like the dude from Jurassic Park. Yeah, we spared no expense. Meanwhile, the dinosaurs are running around eating people, right? You know, but you spared no expense. So that's kind of what he did. And that's where you get batch variations, because every year there's a different high-priced version of something. Every year there's a higher-priced lavender. Every year there's a higher price this, there's a higher price that. It may be a different supplier. You're literally looking at the price point. You're not looking at what it is or how it will affect anything. You just want the most expensive thing on the menu, right? So one year, that might be the Wagyu steak. The next year, it might be the filet mignon. You just want the most expensive thing. Who cares? Because that's the lie. Perpetuate the lie of the best materials. And that's where you get, you know, 101 kinds of Aventus. Some are smokier, some are more pineapple-y, some are more vanilla, some are more of the Ambrox side of things. Yeah, Honestly, I don't care. At the prices they sell, I have a real bottle of Aventus from 2017, and it's a lifetime supply, because I also own the clones too. You know, I have a bottle of Mont Blanc Explorer. I have a bottle of Club de Nuit Intense that I wear. So that bottle of Aventus is just a reference at this point. It's a really expensive reference, but it's a reference. I'm not really too concerned if my bottle of Aventus is more Aventus-y than your Aventus. I just, no, don't come at me with that. And there you have it, guys. That's the Creed video. Hopefully you learned something. I managed to get it in under 25, so go me. And yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff I left out. But if there's anything you need, more information, more questions that went unanswered, you can always hit me up. All right, guys, this has been The Unlist. Hope you enjoyed it.